On a cold Tuesday morning in Lagos, a woman in a designer coat walked past a man playing violin on the street. She did not slow down. She did not look at his face. She did not hear the music the way music is supposed to be heard, which is with the part of you that is not thinking about anything else. She was thinking about a merger and a board meeting and the number of hours before she had to be in 3 places simultaneously. And the man with the violin was simply an obstacle between the pavement and the door she needed to walk through. She said something to him. Not kind. The kind of thing that comes out when a person has been moving too fast for too long, and something in their path has reminded them that the world does not organize itself around their schedule. He looked up at her. He said something back. She laughed at him, one short, dry laugh. Then she dropped a single coin into his case and walked into her building. He looked at the coin. He did not look angry. He looked like someone who had understood something about the person who had just walked past. 3 days later, he was standing at the front of her company's rehearsal room with a violin in his hand, trying to save her career. Now, I am going to tell you everything about these 2 people, not just what happened in those 3 days, the full story, where they each came from, what music meant to both of them and what it had cost them, the betrayal that came from inside the building when things were finally going right, the moment at the piano that nobody in that audience was prepared for, and the photograph. There is a photograph in this story that changes everything. That arrives at the exact moment when you think you already understand what is happening and makes you understand that you did not understand anything. But before the photograph, before the gala and the violin in the aisle and the woman sitting at the piano after 20 years away from it, you need to understand who these 2 people were when they were not yet CEO and street musician. You need to understand the children they were before life made them into the adults that Tuesday morning produced. Because this story starts at a music camp, and it ends at a piano. And the distance between those 2 things is about 25 years of choices that both of them made, and both of them would have made differently if they had known the full picture. Stay right here. Like this video if you have ever let life talk you out of something you loved and then wondered what would happen if you went back to it. Subscribe to Tribal Tales Hub, hit that bell, new story every single week. Drop a comment. Has anyone ever seen you more clearly than you saw yourself? Tell us. The music camp was called Harmony Bridge. It ran every summer from the late 1990s into the 2000s, in a complex of low buildings on the outskirts of Abuja that had been set up by a foundation whose goal was to give children from different economic backgrounds access to formal music education for 6 weeks every year. The philosophy was simple. Talent did not distribute itself according to who could afford lessons, and the camp was an attempt to correct for that particular injustice in the way that most good intentions were attempted, imperfectly, inconsistently, but genuinely. Ilara Ademi was 9 years old in the summer of 1999. She came from money, not the enormous wealth she would eventually command as an adult. The comfortable, established, professional money of a Lagos family where her father had built a technology consulting business over 20 years, and where the house was good, and the schools were private, and the family holidays happened, and there was no moment in Ilara's childhood where the question of whether something was possible financially was a real question. Her father, Chief Ademi, had enrolled her in the camp not because she needed the scholarship program, but because the camp's faculty was serious. He had researched it with the thoroughness of a man who researched everything he considered worth doing, and he had decided that 6 weeks with the camp's music teachers would be more formative than 6 months with any private instructor he could find in Lagos. He was right about this. Ilara played piano. She had started at 5, a small upright in the family sitting room that her mother, Adiza Ademi, had chosen specifically because she had grown up with a mother who played, and because she understood from growing up with it that having music in a house was different from having music in a lesson. She wanted Alara to grow up with it the way she had grown up with it, as the background, as the thing that was always there, the way some families had always-on televisions and some had always-open books. Alara had taken to it immediately. Not in the spectacular way that musicians sometimes describe their beginnings, not the prodigy origin story. In the quieter way of a child who sits at an instrument and finds that the instrument makes sense to her, that the relationship between what her hands did and what came out was logical and satisfying and rewarding in a way that made her want to do it again. By 9, she was genuinely good. Not professionally good, the professional distance was still years away, but genuinely good in the way that required a serious camp to develop properly. She arrived at Harmony Bridge with a specific shyness that coexisted with her general competence in a way that her teachers always found slightly surprising. Alara Ademi was capable and slightly afraid of the capable, afraid of the moments when capability was visible, when what she could do was being observed and evaluated. She had the talent. The confidence was coming. It was not yet there. Marcus Adebio was 8. He came from a neighborhood on the north side of Abuja that was several socioeconomic levels from Alara's part of Lagos, in a direction that required no further elaboration. His father was a government clerk. His mother sold food from a small chop house operation that she ran from the front of their rented house, and that produced, with enormous effort and thin margins, enough to keep 6 people fed and the children in school. The scholarship to Harmony Bridge came through the church. Not the church precisely, through a network connected to the church, the specific informal infrastructure of a community that looked after its members through the exchange of information and opportunity. The church's choir director had heard Marcus sing at a service and had told his parents that this child needed formal training, and the choir director had a contact at the camp, and the contact had a scholarship, and the scholarship had an application, and his mother had filled in the application at the kitchen table after the children were asleep, because she did not want them to see the effort in case it did not work. It worked. Marcus arrived at Harmony Bridge with a single bag. He had never played violin before. He had sung in the church choir since he was 5, and he had the specific gift that some singers have, not the voice necessarily, though his voice was good and would get better, but the ear. He heard music the way some people see color, with the specific full-spectrum reception of someone for whom sound had texture and dimension and emotional content that arrived as immediate information rather than processed understanding. The camp assigned him to violin. He was 8 and he had never held one, and by the end of the first week, the camp director had mentioned him in a note to the faculty as someone to watch. Alara and Marcus met on day 4. The meeting was not musical. It was practical. It was lunchtime, and the camp had a specific seating arrangement for the first 2 weeks. Tables were assigned to ensure that children from different backgrounds mixed rather than self-segregating, which was a social engineering decision that the camp directors had learned from experience was necessary. Alara and Marcus were at the same table by assignment. She sat down first. She had a full tray. He sat down across from her. He had a sandwich and water. The scholarship included accommodation and tuition, but the lunch allocation was limited, and the full meal option cost extra, and his parents had not had the extra. He ate his sandwich. He did not look at her tray. He was not performing dignity. He genuinely was not looking at it, because he was watching a sparrow that had landed on the table at the far end of the room, and that had managed, in the 10 seconds before the camp supervisor noticed and shooed it away, to steal something from an unattended plate. He found this tremendously interesting. Alara watched him watching the sparrow. She looked at his lunch and then at her tray and then at her lunch. She slid half of what was on her tray across to his side of the table. She did not explain this. He looked at the food. He looked at her. "I can't eat all of it," she said. She was 9 years old and she was not comfortable with the grand gesture. She chose the practical framing. He looked at the food again. "Thank you," he said. They ate in a silence that was not uncomfortable, the specific silence of two children who have not yet worked out how to talk to each other, but who are not bothered by not having worked it out yet. He asked her eventually, "What do you play?" "Piano," she said. "I heard someone on the piano in practice room 3 this morning," he said. "Early, before breakfast." "That was me," she said. "You play like you are looking for something," he said. She looked at him. She was 9. She did not have the language to respond to this. "I play like I am looking for something," she repeated. "You play all the notes right," he said, "but you keep pausing before the hard parts, like you are deciding whether to try them." She looked at him for a long moment. She picked up her fork. "You listen funny," she said. "I hear things," he said. "What things?" she said. "What's underneath the music," he said. "Not what the player is doing, what they are thinking." She looked at him. He was 8 years old. She said, "Nobody has ever said that to me before." "Is it true?" he said. She thought about it. "Yes," she said. "Then someone should have said it before," he said, and went back to the food. That was the beginning. 6 weeks is enough time for children to build the specific friendship of people who have found someone who sees them. Not in the adult way of careful investment and gradual revelation, in the child way of immediate, complete presence. By the 3rd week, they were the camp's unofficial musical pair, the girl at the piano and the boy with the violin, who had taken to the instrument with the alarming speed of someone for whom the instrument and the person were already compatible before the instrument arrived. They played together for the first time in week 4. No arrangement, no plan. The practice rooms had open-door policies, and Marcus had wandered past room 3 on an evening when Alara was working on something, a chop in piece, one of the simpler nocturnes that she had been assigned and that she had been approaching with the hesitance he had identified on day 4. She kept stopping before the passage in the middle that required a specific confidence of touch, the passage that was not technically difficult but that required you to mean it. And Alara was not yet sure how to mean things at full volume. He came in and he sat on the floor and he listened. She played the piece up to the difficult passage and she stopped. He picked up his violin. He played the passage. Not perfectly. He had been playing for 4 weeks and perfect was not available. But he played it with the full conviction of someone for whom hesitance was simply not the available mode, because he had grown up in an environment where hesitance about things you loved was not something you could afford. She listened. She turned back to the keys. She played the passage. She played it the way it was supposed to be played. He nodded. She played the whole piece. He played along on the second run-through, not the melody, something underneath, a compliment, the thing that existed alongside the piano's voice rather than in competition with it. The camp director heard them from the hallway. She stopped outside the door. She listened for a full minute before walking on. She told the faculty meeting the next morning, "There is something happening in practice room 3. The camp ended in August. On the last day, Alara gave Marcus her address in Lagos, and he gave her his in Abuja. They exchanged these with the specific gravity of 8- and 9-year-olds, who understood that this was a significant action, even if they did not fully understand how to maintain what it was supposed to maintain. He had no photograph of them together. One of the camp counselors had taken a photograph at the closing ceremony, the whole group, standard camp documentation. She had printed a copy for each child. Alara had received hers. Marcus had received his. In the photograph, at the left edge, the girl from Lagos and the boy from Abuja were standing close enough that their shoulders touched in the way that happens when you are comfortable with someone. He kept the photograph. She lost hers in a move, or thought she did. She wrote to him twice that autumn. He did not receive the letters. The address she had written had a street number wrong, 9 instead of 6. a digit's difference that sent her letters to a house 3 streets from his, where they were received by an elderly man who did not know what to do with letters addressed to a child he had never heard of, and who eventually put them in a drawer where they remained for several years. He did not write because he was waiting for her to write first, because writing first felt too forward and too exposed for an 8-year-old who had had very little experience with the vulnerability of wanting to maintain something. They lost contact. The way children lose contact, not with drama, not with a decision. The specific slow dissolve of distance and time and the next things arriving to fill the space. And 25 years passed. Stay with us, because what 25 years did to both of them is the whole next chapter. Alara Ademi became Alara Ademi James when she married Colonel James at 27. The marriage lasted 4 years, not bitterly, without the specific bitterness of betrayal, more with the quiet sadness of 2 people who had made a decision based on who they were at 27 and who found at 31 that who they were had diverged in ways that the decision could not accommodate. They separated amicably, which is to say with the specific careful civility of 2 people who respected each other enough to be honest, and who understood that honesty in this case meant acknowledging that something was not working rather than continuing to insist that it was. She kept his name professionally, not for sentimental reasons, for continuity. She had been building her professional identity as Ademi James for 4 years, and the business world that was beginning to know her name knew this version of it. She had started building that professional identity in her mid-20s, after her father retired from the technology consulting business. Chief Ademi had handed her the company in 2016. Not suddenly, a 5-year process of gradual transition that he had planned with the same thoroughness with which he had planned everything. He had been careful to ensure that she understood every part of the business before any part of it was hers to manage, and she had been, during those 5 years, the most attentive student of a company's operations that he had ever worked with. She had also, during those 5 years, acquired specific characteristics that the work produced. The speed. Chief Ademi had always moved methodically, the deliberate pace of someone who believed that correct was more important than fast. Alara moved fast because the technology sector in Nigeria in the 2010s rewarded speed in a way that it did not reward deliberation, and because she had the specific brain of someone who processed complex information quickly and found methodical packing frustrating. The distance. She had an ability to make decisions about people, staffing decisions, partnership decisions, the daily decisions about who got what role and what access and what trust. That was functional and accurate, and that operated at a level of remove that the people on the receiving end of those decisions sometimes experienced as coldness. She was not cold. She was fast, and fast and warm in combination was difficult to maintain, and she had found over time that the speed was non-negotiable and the warmth was the thing that got managed down. The piano had stopped being relevant sometime in her early 20s. Not a decision, a gradual withdrawal. The recital at 9 had been the first time she performed in front of people who were not her family, and it had also been the night her mother died. Adiz Ademi had been in the audience. She had been there for the beginning of the piece. She had been there for the wrong note, the stumble in the difficult passage that Alara had been working on for weeks, the specific moment of failure that every performer experiences and that most performers recover from without consequence. Adiz had not been in the audience at the end. She had felt unwell during the performance. She had been taken to the lobby. She had collapsed. By the time Alara finished playing and came off the stage looking for her mother's face, her mother was in an ambulance. She died that night. A stroke. Not because of the recital, the stroke had been building for weeks, the medical reality of a condition that had been giving signals that had been misread as something less serious. It would have happened that night or the night after or the week after. The recital was where it happened to happen. Alara was 9 years old and she had played a wrong note, and her mother had died. The logic of this was not correct. She knew this. She had been told this by multiple people over multiple years, doctors and therapists and her father and her aunt, and eventually a therapist she had seen in her late 20s who had been very clear and very specific about the non-relationship between the note and the stroke. The knowledge and the feeling were not the same thing. She had not played piano seriously since that night. Occasionally she would sit at a party, at an event where a piano was present and someone asked. She would play a few bars and stop. She would say she was out of practice. She would smile and move to another part of the room. She did not go near practice. She did not buy a piano. She did not listen to piano-led recordings in a way that was comfortable to sit with. She became CEO of Adami Tech Solutions. She had rebranded it, which was one of her first executive decisions, and one that Chief Adami had observed with a smile that contained exactly the right amount of pride and exactly the right amount of stepping back. The company grew under her leadership. She made 3 acquisitions in 4 years. She expanded into East Africa. She hired well and fired decisively, and operated the company with the specific combination of vision and execution that made it, by 2023, one of the most cited technology companies in the Nigerian and regional press. She also, in that process, became the person who walked past a street musician on a cold Tuesday morning and dropped a single coin. She was not that person on purpose. Nobody is that person on purpose. Marcus Adebio's path was different. He had left Abuja for Lagos at 18 on a music scholarship. Not Harmony Bridge this time, a full secondary school scholarship to a private institution that had seen him perform at a regional competition and that had recognized the specific quality of what he did. He went to London at 22. The Royal Academy of Music offered him a place through a competitive audition process that he entered on the encouragement of his secondary school music teacher, who had been watching Marcus for 4 years, and who had the specific conviction of someone who understood that what they were observing was rare, and that rare things needed to be placed in environments large enough to hold them. He was in London for 3 years. The 3 years were both the best and the worst of his young adult life. The best because London gave him access to the full tradition, the complete library of what serious music had been over centuries, the living, breathing reality of orchestras and chamber groups and solo performances of a quality that he had heard on recordings but had never been physically inside. He sat in concert halls and he listened, and something in him was continuously calibrated by the listening. He got better in London, better than he had thought he could get. The worst because he was poor in London, in a way that was different from being poor in Abuja. In Abuja, his family's poverty had the specific texture of a community's poverty, shared, familiar, managed collectively. In London, he was poor in the specific isolated way of a foreign student in an expensive city, where the poverty was invisible to most of the people around him, and where managing it required a constant low-level effort that existed alongside the music, rather than being part of the same context. He also, at the academy, encountered something he had not expected. Politics. Not the political politics of government and parties. The institutional politics of a serious music conservatory, the specific hierarchies of which teachers had which allegiances, which students were being developed for which futures, which styles of musicianship were being rewarded and which were being politely discouraged. Marcus played with a quality that was not purely classical. It had something else in it, something that had come from the church choir in Abuja and from the camp, and from years of listening to the full range of what music was in West Africa. It was not wrong, but it was not the thing the academy's most prominent faculty were trained to reward. He had a significant disagreement with a senior faculty member in his 3rd year. The disagreement was about a recital program, what he was going to perform, how he was going to perform it. He wanted to do something that combined a classical foundation with a compositional element that was entirely his own, something that reflected what the music meant to him rather than what the institution recognized as appropriate demonstration of his technique. The faculty member said no. Marcus said the word that young men say in those moments when they are 24 and convinced they are right, and have not yet learned that being right and being wise are different currencies. The result was documented as instability in his file, a word that carried the specific institutional weight of a judgment rather than a description. He lost the scholarship. He came back to Lagos. He was 25 years old, and he had a music education that was extraordinary and a reputation that had a word in it that he could not get out from behind. He tried. He tried in the ways that a serious musician tries in Lagos in the 2000s and 2010s, the orchestras, the teaching, the recording sessions. He was excellent in all of them, but the Academy story followed him, not because it was widely known, but because the music world was small enough that a word in the right ear was enough to close a door. He had 2 serious music employment opportunities in 3 years. Both came close. Both fell through. He did not stop playing. He could not stop playing. Playing was not something he did. It was something he was, in the same way that thinking was not something people did but was simply what happened when there was nothing stopping it. He played on streets. Not from desperation, initially from a desire to keep playing somewhere, anywhere, in front of people, in the context of the city's actual daily life. He had read about the tradition in European cities of serious musicians playing publicly, and he had understood it as a practice, as a form of staying connected to the music's relationship with people rather than with institutions. He had a spot on the street near a commercial building in Victoria Island that he had been using for about 8 months. He was there on Tuesday mornings when it was cold. He was there on the morning that Alara Ademi James walked past in her designer coat and dropped a single coin. He did not know who she was. He looked at the coin after she went in. He had the specific feeling that he had been looking at a person who reminded him of something he could not place, a quality of recognition without a specific source. He knew the feeling. He had had it before about people in Lagos who turned out to have been in the same room as him at some point long before either of them remembered. He put the coin in his jacket pocket. He kept playing. What happens next is where this story stops being about a street and a coin. The Elite Tech Choir had been a fixture of Ademi Tech Solutions since Chief Ademi founded it in 2008. He had started it for the reason that most things are started that do not have an obvious business justification, because he believed it was good for the people who worked in the company, and because he believed that things that were good for people were eventually good for the company, even if you could not quantify the mechanism directly. He had a theory about shared experience and cohesion, and the specific culture that existed in organizations where people understood each other as more than professional functions. The choir had worked for a while. Under his tenure, it had been genuinely good, not professional, not competition grade, but genuinely good in the way of things where the people involved care about the thing for its own sake. They had performed at company events and at 1 or 2 external charity events, and the performances had been the kind that left people feeling something rather than simply filling time. When Alara took over, the choir continued because Chief Ademi had asked her to continue it, and because she had not yet found a reason to stop it. It was a line item in the culture budget. It had a director, a man named Tukumbo who had been running it since 2012, and who was competent in the way of someone who was managing rather than inspiring. The gala was the problem. The annual technology industry gala was one of the most significant events in the Nigerian tech calendar, not because of the awards, which were real but secondary, but because of who attended and what conversations happened at the edges of it. The gala had taken on a specific significance in the current year because Adami Tech Solutions was in the middle of a merger negotiation with a Pan-African financial technology group, and the merger was not yet certain, and the parties on the other side of the merger were going to be at the gala. The board had decided 3 weeks before the gala that the elite tech choir performing at the event was a statement about company culture, about the human dimension of a technology company that had a reputation for speed and effectiveness, but that the merger partners had expressed, in a specific off-the-record moment, some concern about being described as machine-like. The performance was supposed to soften that perception. The choir at the first rehearsal, with the stakes now clear, was spectacularly bad. Not individually. Each member had a voice that was somewhere on the usable spectrum. Collectively, they sounded like a group of people who were thinking about different things while producing overlapping sounds in the same approximate direction. Tokumbo had been trying to fix this for 2 weeks. He quit on a Monday, 48 hours before the gala, which was the specific timing of someone who has reached their limit and has stopped caring about the inconvenience their departure causes. Elara came to the rehearsal room. She watched 10 minutes of the choir attempting a piece that was supposed to be uplifting. She turned off the music track they were rehearsing to. "Stop," she said. The room went quiet. She looked at them. She said, "What is happening in this room is not acceptable. This performance represents this company at the most important industry event of the year. I need you to tell me what the problem is." Nobody said anything. She had not understood yet that the silence was itself the answer. "In 2 days," she said, "you are going to stand in front of every significant person in this industry. You are going to represent 20 years of work that my father started and that I have continued. I need you to sing." Still silence. "Can anyone tell me what?" "We're afraid," said a voice. She looked at the speaker. A young woman in the second row, junior analyst, she thought, or perhaps marketing. She was the kind of person who existed in the building but not yet in Elara's specific field of attention. "Afraid," Elara said. "Of getting it wrong," the young woman said. "Of making a mistake in front of you. Every time we make a mistake in rehearsal she stopped. "I what?" Elara said. The young woman said nothing. The room was very quiet. From the doorway a voice said, "They sound like that because they're afraid of you, not because they can't sing." Elara turned. Marcus was in the doorway. He had been hired the previous week through the building's facilities management contractor to do maintenance work on the ventilation system. One of those arrangements that happens at the intersection of a facility's need and a human network, where a contractor knows someone who needs work. He had been in the building for 3 days and had spent most of his time in the upper levels of the building, where the ventilation infrastructure was concentrated. He had heard the rehearsal from a corridor. He had walked to the doorway. Elara looked at him. She recognized him from the street, the violin, the cold morning, the coin. He recognized her from the same morning. "You," she said. Her voice had a quality in it that was not the full hostility of the street, something more complicated. "Me," he said. "You are here to fix vents," she said. "I am here because something in that room needs more than vents fixed," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the choir. She looked back at him. The specific, ruthless pragmatism of someone who was 48 hours from a potentially career-defining failure was operating in her head, and that pragmatism was telling her, "You do not have the luxury of pride right now." "What can you do?" she said. "Let me work with them for 48 hours, he said. "If it doesn't work, I leave. No money, no complaint if it works." "What do you want?" she said. "A conversation," he said. "Afterward, a real one." She looked at him. "About what?" she said. "About why you stopped playing," he said. The room. The room did a very specific thing. 43 people who had been watching this exchange with the attention of people watching something they did not fully understand registered the shift in Alara's expression when he said the word playing. She did not say anything for a long time. "Everyone take a break," she said finally. 30 minutes. The room emptied. She looked at Marcus. "Nobody knows that about me," she said. "I know," he said. "I can hear it when someone is not playing something they should be playing, same as I can hear when a choir is singing without their soul in it." "You cannot fix a choir in 48 hours, she said. "I cannot fix it," he said. "They can. They need to remember why music matters and stop performing for you." She looked at him. 48 hours, she said, "if this fails." "It won't," he said. He was not confident in the way of a performer. He was certain in the way of someone who knew what he was doing. She walked out. He went into the rehearsal room, and he waited for the choir to come back. When they came back, he was sitting on the floor. "Sit down," he said. They looked at each other. "On the floor," he said. "All of you, yes, I mean it." They sat on the floor. He picked up his violin. He played. Not the piece they had been rehearsing. Something slower, something in a minor key, something that had the specific texture of loss in it without being sad exactly. More the way loss feels when you have had enough time with it that it has become part of you. The room went very quiet. "Close your eyes," he said. "Think of the person you miss the most, not what they looked like, what it felt like to be near them." He kept playing. Someone hummed, a single voice quiet low. Another joined. Then another. He moved the music slightly, a change in key, gradual, so the movement was felt rather than noticed. The humming moved with it. He was doing something that required the specific skill of someone who could hear an entire group of people simultaneously and lead them without them knowing they were being led. From her glass-walled office above the rehearsal room, Alara watched. She had told herself she was going back to work. She had come to the window to see how the room was settling, and she had stopped. She could see her employees with their eyes closed, and their faces doing things she had not seen their faces do in a company context. Real things. The specific, honest expressions that people had when they were inside an experience rather than performing it. She saw a man in accounting who she knew had lost his mother recently, whose face had gone somewhere specific and private, and who was singing with his eyes closed and his hands pressed flat on the floor beside him. She saw the young woman who had said we're afraid, whose voice was the clearest thing in the room, who had apparently been carrying something extraordinary behind the fear the whole time. She watched for 20 minutes. She went back to her desk. She sat at her desk and she thought about Adiz, not the way she usually thought about her mother, the managed, contained version, the full version, the face in the audience, the specific way Adiz had smiled when Alara walked onto the stage. She thought she smiled because she was proud before the music started. She had known this, she had been told this. She had not felt it until now. At 10 in the evening, she went back down to the rehearsal room. It was empty except for Marcus. He was sitting with his violin in his lap, making small adjustments to the tuning with the patient attention of someone who was never quite done with a thing as long as there was something to be done with it. She came in. She sat across from him. She told him about Adiz. Not as a statement, as a conversation. The first one really since the death, where she told the full story without managing it toward a conclusion. The recital, the wrong note, the audience, the ambulance, the 23 years since. He listened. When she finished, he said, "She didn't die because of a note, Alara. She died listening to her daughter. Whatever happened to her body that night, her last hours were spent hearing you play. That was the choice she made." She looked at him. "You said she smiled before the music started," he said. "That was the real moment. The note was just a note." She was very still. He said, "You have been silent for 23 years because of a note." She was silent for whatever comes after. Which one of you deserved the silence? She looked at the rehearsal room floor. "Tomorrow is the gala," she said. "Yes," he said. "If this goes well," she said. "When this goes well," he said. "The conversation we said we would have afterward," she said. "You said you wanted to talk about something. What was it really?" He looked at her. He said, "I think that is a conversation for after." She looked at him. "Okay," she said, "after." She went home. She did not sleep. She thought about the wrong note. She thought about Adi's smile. She thought about a boy who listened to what was underneath the music. The morning of the gala, and everything is about to go wrong before it goes right. Subscribe to Tribal Tales Hub, because the betrayal that comes next is the part nobody expected. Hit that bell. Julian Ose had been CFO of Adami Tech Solutions for 4 years. He was good at the job in the specific way that financial executives were good at jobs: the numbers, the compliance, the specific architecture of a balance sheet, the management of the relationships with the financial institutions that the company depended on. He was also, underneath the competence, someone who had not enjoyed working for Elara as much as he had expected to. He had expected, when he was appointed, that the CEO would be someone he could manage. He had not managed her once in 4 years. Not because she was difficult in the obvious way. She was not arbitrary or irrational. She was simply always more prepared than him, always faster in her thinking, always 2 steps ahead of the conversation in a way that left no gap for the kind of influence that Julian had always exercised in previous roles. He also had his own view about the merger. His view was that the choir and the gala performance and the whole culture-softening initiative was a distraction from what the merger actually required, which was a better financial structure, which was something he understood, and she was not consulting him about in the way he expected. He had been watching Marcus with the specific attention of someone who was looking for an angle. He found it on the night before the gala. He had a contact at the Royal Academy, not a close one, but a professional connection from a conference 2 years ago. He had, out of a curiosity that was not entirely innocent, asked the contact about Marcus Adebayo. He had received, in a reply that came the following morning, the summary of what was in the Academy's institutional record: instability, scholarship revoked, departure from the program. He did not ask for context. He did not investigate what instability meant in that specific institutional record. He did not find out that the word was a judgment by a faculty member who had been protecting his own curriculum agenda. He took the information, and he went to find Elara. He caught her before the choir's final rehearsal on the morning of the gala. He told her what he had found. He said, "This man is a fraud, Elara. He was kicked out of the Royal Academy. They revoked his scholarship. The word in the file is instability." He paused to let the word sit. "You put your company's most important performance in the hands of someone who was removed from serious music for psychological instability." She looked at him. "Where did you find this?" she said. He told her. She said, "Did you find out why?" "The file says," he began. "Did you find out why?" she repeated. Julian looked at her. "The file is sufficient," he said. "Elara, cancel the choir. Use the time for the merger conversation. That is what this gala is actually for." She looked at him for a long moment. She saw something in his face that she had learned to read over 4 years of working with him. The thing that was there when he was protecting something other than the company. "I'll think about it," she said. She went downstairs. She went to the rehearsal room. Marcus was not there. She went to the security desk and asked where the maintenance contractor was. The security officer told her that Marcus had been asked to leave the premises. He had been escorted out 40 minutes ago. The instruction had come from the CFO's office. She stood at the security desk. She thought Julian called security while he was telling me he had found out about the academy. He had not told her and then waited for her response. He had already removed Marcus before he came to tell her. She felt something she did not entirely have a name for. Not anger. Anger was familiar. This was colder. The specific cold of understanding that someone in a position of trust has used that position for their own agenda. She went to the street. The spot where Marcus had his crate was empty. She looked at the pavement. The penny was there. The single coin she had dropped into his case on Tuesday morning. She recognized it only because there was a coin on the pavement near the empty crate, and because she understood, with a certainty that did not require verification, that he had placed it there deliberately when he left. She picked it up. She stood on the street. She had several hours before the gala. She had a choir that she had left to Marcus's method, and that was, she believed, genuinely ready to perform. She had no conductor. She had a CFO who had removed her conductor behind her back because the conductor had a single word in a file from 20 years ago. She called her assistant. She said, "I need Marcus Adebayo's phone number, the one he gave facilities management when he was contracted." She called it. He answered. "Where are you?" she said. "I was asked to leave the building," he said. "I know," she said. "Julian did it without my knowledge." Silence. "The gala is tonight," she said. "Yes," he said. "The choir is ready," she said. "I believe so," he said. "But they need," she stopped. She was about to say they need you. She stopped because she realized that what she was about to say was true but incomplete. "Come tonight," she said. "Not as the conductor, as a musician. Bring your violin, just come." "Why?" he said. She looked at the penny in her hand. "Because you are owed a conversation," she said, "and because I am going to need someone who understands what I am about to do." "What are you about to do?" he said. She looked up at the building. She looked at the piano she knew was in the gala venue. "Something I should have done 23 years ago," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I will be there," he said. She went back inside. She went to Julian's office. She stood in the doorway. She said, "You removed someone from this building without my authorization. That is the last time something like that happens in this company." She paused. "And after tonight, we are going to have a very different conversation about your role here." She left before he could respond. She spent the afternoon doing what she always did, working, managing the final logistics of the gala, reviewing the merger documentation that Julian had been right, in a factual if not strategic sense, was the evening's primary business, answering the 17 things that required her specific input before the event. She also, for 40 minutes in the late afternoon, sat at her desk and did something she had not done in 23 years. She played. Not on a piano. She did not have one in the office. On a keyboard that one of the music equipment suppliers had left in the storage room adjacent to the rehearsal room. A simple electronic keyboard that was not the right instrument, and that had the slightly flat quality of something that was functional rather than beautiful. She played the nocturne. The Chopin piece, the one from the practice room at camp, the one with the difficult passage in the middle. She played up to the difficult passage. She did not stop. She played through it. It was not perfect. 23 years of not playing made perfection unavailable. But it was real and it was hers, and she played the full piece, and then she sat with her hands in her lap and she breathed. She thought, that is the first time since that night. She thought, it is not what I thought it would be. She thought, it is better than I thought it would be. She put on the coat. She went to the gala. The gala, the moment everyone in that room is going to remember, and then the photograph. The gala was in a ballroom in a Victoria Island hotel. The room held 400 people, industry executives, investors, the specific population of a significant sector event where the business transacted was at the tables and at the edges and in the corridors and everywhere except the formal program. The formal program existed to provide structure to the evening. The actual work of the evening happened around it. The elite tech choir was scheduled second in the program, after the welcome remarks, before the dinner service. Alara arrived at 7:15. The choir was already backstage, in a holding room where Marcus had left them with a specific instruction that she learned about only afterward. He had told them, before he was removed from the building, that if he was not there tonight, it was because someone who was afraid of what they might do had made sure he could not be. He had told them that the best way to handle fear from outside was to be too much themselves for the fear to have room. She found the choir in the holding room. They were quiet, not the afraid quiet of the rehearsal 2 days ago, a different kind of quiet, the specific quiet of people who have found something inside themselves and are holding it carefully. She looked at them. "Are you ready?" she said. "Are you?" The young woman, whose name was Tassin, she had learned in the past 2 days, said. Alara looked at her. "I think so," she said. Marcus said, Tassin started. "What did he say?" Alara said. "He said that the person who needs to be on that stage with us is not a conductor," Tassin said. "He said it without saying who." Alara looked at the floor. She thought about the electronic keyboard in the storage room. She thought about the nocturne and the difficult passage and the 23 years. She thought about Adi's smile. She thought she smiled before the music started. The program director came to the holding room door. 3 minutes, he said. Alara straightened. She looked at the choir. "I am going to sit at the piano," she said. The choir looked at each other. "We don't have an arrangement for piano," Tassin said. "I know," Alara said. "Follow me. When I start, come in where it feels right. You know what the music is doing, trust that." She walked out to the stage. The room was full. 400 people with the ambient noise of a full event, conversation and cutlery, and the specific hubbub that existed before a performance began. The stage was lit with the specific warm lighting of a formal event. The grand piano was at stage left. She sat at the piano. The room did not notice immediately. She looked at the keys. She thought, this is the moment. She thought about 9 years old and a practice room and a boy who sat on the floor and played the difficult passage with his whole conviction. From the back of the room, a violin started to play. The sound cut through the hubbub the way certain sounds cut through certain sounds, not by volume but by quality. The room went quiet, not all at once, in sections, the way attention spread through a crowd when something unexpected was happening and people turned to understand it. Marcus was at the back of the room. He was wearing a tuxedo that was 20 years old. It was clean and pressed, and it fit him with the specific dignity of something that had been maintained carefully across a long time. He was standing at the end of the aisle and he was playing. The melody he was playing was not from any classical repertoire. It was the melody from the practice room at Harmony Bridge, a melody that had never been written down because it had been made in the moment by an 8-year-old boy who was playing alongside a 9-year-old girl who needed to hear that the difficult passage was possible. Alara recognized it. She sat at the piano and she recognized it in the first 4 notes, and something in her went completely still. She looked at Marcus walking down the aisle. He looked at her. He nodded. She put her hands on the keys. She played. Not the Chopin Nocturne, the melody from the practice room. She found it from the 4 notes she had heard and she played it, and it expanded under her hands into something that the keyboard in the storage room had not been able to produce. The full resonance of a concert grand, the specific quality of an instrument that was made for this room and this moment. The choir came in. Not on a cue, on a feeling. Tassin's voice first, then the others, following the melody without a prearranged arrangement, doing what Marcus had been teaching them for 48 hours, which was to listen to the music and respond to what they actually heard. The room was very quiet. The 400 people at their tables were not making ambient noise anymore. 2 minutes in, someone stood. Not as a performance, not the calculated standing ovation that sometimes happened at events like this. A genuine standing, the involuntary rise of someone who has received something they were not expecting to receive. Others followed. By the end, there were people standing throughout the room. Julian was in the corner. He was not standing. He was watching Alara at the piano with the expression of a man who had made a significant miscalculation and was understanding the full dimensions of it. Marcus reached the front of the room while the choir was still singing. He played alongside the piano. He and Alara did not look at each other for most of the performance. They did not need to. The music was the communication. At the end, when the last note had faded, and the room was doing the thing that rooms do in the 10 seconds after something extraordinary when nobody knows quite what comes next, Marcus reached into his jacket pocket. He took out a photograph. He placed it on the piano lid in front of Alara. She looked at it. It was a photograph from a music camp. 25 years old, slightly faded, the edges worn in the way of something that had been held many times. On the left side of the group photograph, a girl from Lagos and a boy from Abuja with their shoulders touching. She looked at the photograph. She looked at Marcus. He was watching her with the calm, tired eyes she had seen on the street on Tuesday morning. She thought he has had this photograph for 25 years. She thought he kept looking. She stood up from the piano. The room was applauding, the kind of applause that filled the space, not polite, not performed, genuine. She looked at Julian in the corner. She looked at the choir, who were looking at her with the expressions of people who had just done something they did not know they could do. She looked at Marcus. The conversation, she said, it was not audible over the room's noise, but he understood. After, he said, they talked for 3 hours. Not that evening, after. The evening was the gala, the merger conversation that happened at the tables exactly as intended. The board members who came to Alara with expressions that had changed from the morning's wariness. The evening was the professional success that the performance had produced. The 3 hours came the following afternoon. They went to a cafe, not a corporate environment, not a space that had anything to do with either of their professional lives. A quiet place with good coffee where 2 people could sit across from each other and say the things that had accumulated over 25 years and over 2 days and over a single morning on a street with a coin. He told her about the camp, about the sandwich, about the address with the wrong number, about the photograph he had kept and why, not sentimentally, but because it was evidence of something he believed and that had become difficult to believe in across the years when things were difficult. He told her about the academy, the full story, what the word instability actually meant in context, which was that a 24-year-old had refused to comply with a faculty member's specific curriculum agenda and had said so in terms that a 24-year-old uses and that an institution records differently. She told him about the letters she had sent to the wrong address. He looked at her. "You wrote," he said. "Twice," she said, "that autumn." He was quiet. "The address was wrong," she said. 9 instead of 6, he said, working it out. "I think so," she said. He looked at the table. "I thought you had moved on," he said. "I waited for a letter, and when it didn't come, I thought." "I thought you had moved on," she said. They sat with this for a moment. 25 years, he said. Because of one number, she said. He was quiet. Then he said, or because of the right timing. She looked at him. What do you mean? She said. I mean, he said slowly, that the 25 years made both of us into the people who could have the conversation we had on the night before the gala, and in the practice room, and here. She thought about this. You think you had to become who you became, she said. I think the camp version of me could not have helped you the way the street version of me did, he said. She was quiet for a moment. The street version of you, she said. Yes, he said. She thought about this, about the relationship between the academy and the street, and what the street had given him that the academy had tried to take, which was a specific relationship with music as something that belonged to everyone and not to institutions. She thought about what the decades of running her father's company had given her and taken from her. She said, "What do you want to do?" "What do you mean?" he said. "With your music," she said. "Not with street performances, with the actual career." He thought about it. "Teach," he said. "I have been thinking about it for years. Not formal community teaching, for children who are where I was at 8, who have the ear but not the access." She looked at him. She thought about Harmony Bridge. "My father's foundation still has funds," she said. "The foundation he set up when he sold part of the company 5 years ago. It is supposed to be for cultural and community initiatives, and he has been asking me for 2 years what to use it for." He looked at her. "I am not offering you a charity," she said. "I am offering you a partnership. You know what the program should look like. I know how to set up the infrastructure. The foundation has the resources." He was quiet. "And the company," he said. She thought about Julian, about the merger, about the board and the merger and the machine she had been running. "The company is fine," she said. "The company will continue. I am the CEO, but the company is not the only thing anymore." He looked at her. "Is this because of the gala?" he said. "Because of last night?" "It is because of practice room 3, she said. "And because of Tuesday morning. And because I need to stop doing the thing I have been doing, which is being only the company and nothing else." "What else do you want to be?" he said. She looked at the table. "Someone who plays piano," she said. "Again, properly, regularly, in a space where it matters to someone." He looked at her. "We could build that space," he said. "Yes," she said, "we could." The program launched 8 months later. It was called Harmony, not the bridge part, just Harmony. A reference that neither of them explained publicly and that they understood between themselves without needing to explain. It ran from a community center in a working-class area of Lagos. It served children between 7 and 15 who had been identified through school networks and church networks, and the specific informal infrastructure of communities that look after their members by passing information about who needed what. Marcus taught violin and ear training, and music theory delivered through the music rather than preceding it. He had the specific gift of someone who understood that the theory was most useful when it arrived after the love rather than before it. Ilara taught piano, not as a secondary activity, as something she had recommitted to in the months after the gala, practice, real practice, the daily sustained engagement with an instrument that she had abandoned for 23 years and that had, improbably, returned to her with less rust on it than she had expected. The muscle memory was faint but present. The ear was intact. The 23 years had not taken the understanding, only the practice. She played every morning before the workday. She had bought a piano. It sat in the room in her house that had been a home office and that she had emptied and cleared and given back to music. Chief Ademi came to see the Harmony program on its 3rd month. He sat in the back of a room where 12 children were playing. Some of them were 3 weeks in. Some of them were 3 months in. The range of skill was enormous. The youngest was struggling with holding a bow correctly, and the oldest was attempting something that Marcus had assigned, and that the child was not yet ready for but was trying anyway with the specific wholeness of someone who did not know enough to be afraid. Chief Ademi sat in the back of the room and he watched. After an hour, he went to where Alara was sitting. He said, "This is what I was trying to do in 2008. "I know," she said. "You found it," he said. "Someone helped me find it," she said. He looked at Marcus across the room. "The violin player," he said. "Yes," she said. He was quiet. "Your mother would have come here every week," he said. She looked at the room. "I know," she said. He put his hand on hers for a moment. Then he went back to watching the children. Julian left the company 6 weeks after the gala. Not fired, he made the specific calculation that people in his position made when the landscape had shifted clearly, and the calculation was that departure was more dignified than the alternative. He left with a reference that was factual and a professional network that was intact, and the specific private knowledge of what he had done and how it had resolved. The merger completed in March. It was a good deal. Better, actually, than the version that had been on the table before the gala. The performance had done something to the conversation at the tables that evening that the numbers alone had not been able to do, and the merger partners had come to the final negotiation with a warmth about the company that had been absent in the earlier rounds. Alara presented at the merger completion press conference in a room that included most of the industry people who had been at the gala. At one point, someone asked her about the choir, about the performance, about the pianist. She said, "That pianist was the version of me that existed before I started running a company. The gala was the first time I remembered that she was still there." The room was quiet for a moment. Then a journalist asked, "And the violin player, who was he?" She looked at the question for a moment. She said, "Someone I have known for a long time." Marcus and Alara married in the following year. The ceremony was small, not the event that a CEO's wedding might be expected to be, not the production that either of their professional lives might have suggested was appropriate. Small. The people who actually knew them, which was a more specific group than the professional network and a more meaningful one. At the reception, there was music. Marcus played. Alara played. At one point they played together the melody from the practice room, which she had transcribed properly by now, which had a name written at the top of the sheet music that was Room 3. Chief Ademi listened from his seat at the front. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The photograph from Harmony Bridge was framed and on the wall of the community center. Not in a prominent place, on the wall near the piano, in the space between the window and the door, where children who walked in from the street passed it without necessarily stopping. Some of them stopped. Some of them asked what it was. Alara told them it was where it started. There is a thing that Marcus said in the rehearsal room on the night before the gala, and it is the thing that I keep coming back to when I think about this whole story. He said, "The choir sounds like that because they are afraid of you, not because they can't sing." He said it about the choir, but he could have said it about Alara, about the specific way she had been living for the better part of a decade, fast, effective, distant, inside a building that she ran efficiently, and that had somehow become the whole thing, the entire context of her life, at the expense of everything that was not the company. She was afraid too, not of the board or the merger or the industry, afraid of the piano, afraid of the specific thing that had been taken from her at 9 years old, which was the feeling that music was safe, that you could play and the world would not arrange a consequence you could not survive. She had been running a company for years and had not been singing, in the specific, metaphorical way, not actually singing, the thing that is underneath the work, underneath the speed and the decisions and the reputation. The thing that music is when it is working correctly, which is the honest expression of what is actually in you. Marcus had kept the photograph for 25 years. Not because he knew they would find each other again. He did not know that. He kept it because the photograph was evidence of something he believed. That a girl who slid half her lunch across a table to a boy who had nothing because it was the natural thing to do, because she didn't make a calculation about it, because he was there and hungry and it was available, that girl was worth keeping evidence of. He was right. She had been there the whole time. Under the coat, under the company, under the 23 years of silence at the piano, she had been there sliding her lunch across a table if you knew how to look. That is what he was doing when he played on the street. Not busking, looking. If you take anything from this story, take this. The version of you that was real before life told you to be practical, that version is still there. It did not leave. It got quiet. It got managed and organized and rationalized into a smaller space. But it is still there, available, waiting for someone to play the first 4 notes of the melody from practice room 3 and give it permission to come back in. You do not need a gala. You do not need a building. You need the moment of deciding that the thing you have been silent about is worth the risk of making sound again. That moment is available to you. Take it. This has been Tribal Tales Hub. If this story made you feel something, if the practice room or the photograph or the moment at the piano hit you somewhere real like this video, it takes 1 second and it means everything. Subscribe to Tribal Tales Hub. Every week we bring you a story like this one. Real human storytelling, emotional, genuine, the kind that stays with you. Hit that bell. Be there when the next one arrives. Comment below. Tell us, what is the thing you have been silent about? The piano you stopped playing, the version of yourself you set aside because life got practical. Tell us. We read everything. Share this story with someone who needs it. The person who used to do something they loved and who stopped and who you want to remind that it is still available. Send it to them. You know who it is. This has been Tribal Tales Hub. We will see you in the next story.